more than a century, commercial aviation has perfected a system designed to make aircraft traceable everywhere they fly. Satellites, radar networks, transponders, air traffic control checkpoints, and digital telemetry make it almost impossible for a modern jet to simply vanish. Yet in March 2014, that is exactly what happened. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, took off from Kuala Lumpur shortly before 1 a.m., bound for Beijing. It climbed to cruising altitude under clear night skies, following one of the busiest air routes in Asia. Nothing appeared abnormal. The aircraft was communicating normally, engines were performing as expected, and the cabin crew prepared for a routine 6-hour flight. Then, only 40 minutes after departure, the aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. In a single moment, the aircraft vanished from civilian radar systems, essentially disappearing from the world of air traffic control. No distress call was made, no emergency code was sent, and no technical information signaled trouble. Military radar later showed something extraordinary. MH370 had turned sharply off its intended course, doubling back across the Malaysian peninsula, and flying hundreds of kilometers into the open Indian Ocean. This change in direction suggested intent. Whether that intent came from a human being at the controls or from automated systems, responding to a catastrophic failure remains unknown. Investigators soon faced the most challenging aviation mystery of the modern era. Search and rescue teams swept the South China Sea without finding a single trace. As evidence mounted, the search shifted west toward the southern Indian Ocean, a vast and unforgiving wilderness of water. For nearly 3 years, ships and underwater drones scanned thousands of square miles of seabed. At times, the mission felt endless, guided by faint satellite data and mathematical modeling rather than confirmed sightings. Fragments of wreckage eventually washed ashore on distant coastlines, Madagascar, Mozambique, and islands off southern Africa. Each piece confirmed the aircraft had indeed ended its journey in the Indian Ocean. Yet, these same fragments offered few answers. They showed impact, but not cause. They hinted at force, but not responsibility. For families, governments, and aviation experts, the disappearance of MH370 shattered assumptions about modern flight. How could a wide-body twin-engine jet equipped with redundant systems, advanced communications, and experienced pilots vanish more completely than aircraft erased during wartime? How could such a loss go unseen in the era of satellites and global surveillance? 3 central theories emerged. The first proposed a deliberate act, someone with cockpit access redirecting the jet intentionally into remote waters. The second suggested a rapid depressurization or mechanical catastrophe that disabled communications, while leaving the aircraft capable of flying on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. The third pointed to a complex chain of failures, electrical, navigational, or atmospheric, that cascaded beyond recovery. None have been conclusively proven. A decade later, MH370 remains the greatest unsolved mystery in civil aviation. It challenged confidence in tracking technologies and motivated new global safety systems. Today, airliners report flight positions more frequently and satellites listen for emergency signals with greater precision. Yet the ocean keeps its secrets, and the final resting place of MH370 remains undiscovered. Some tragedies are resolved with wreckage, black boxes, and clear timelines. MH370 exists outside those boundaries. It is a reminder that even in a connected world, the map still contains blind spots, and flight still carries an element of the unknown. When flight MH370 ceased communicating and slipped from radar screens in the early hours of 8 March 2014, what followed rapidly transformed from a routine rescue mobilization into one of the most complex, expensive, and emotionally charged maritime investigations in modern history. In the aviation world, time is the most unforgiving adversary. The longer a missing aircraft remains undiscovered, the wider the cone of uncertainty grows, stretching limited resources and weakening every assumption that teams deploy into the field. Within hours, search craft from Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, and later China and Australia were skimming above the South China Sea, eyes scanning waves for oil slicks, floating debris, or flares. Nothing appeared out of place. The ocean gave up no clue that anything, let alone a 200-foot-long, 600,000-pound Boeing 777 had crashed into it. This silence forced governments to confront a realization. The initial search grid might be entirely wrong. MH370 had not failed while heading toward Beijing, as everyone assumed. The aircraft's disappearance was already rewriting aviation procedure. Modern jets equipped with satellite, transponders, and redundant digital systems are expected to leave a trace even in failure. MH370 left almost none. Each passing hour caused uncertainty to multiply. At the heart of the growing confusion was a sequence of radar and satellite, findings that challenged every working theory. Military radars in Malaysia and Thailand indicated that the aircraft had executed a controlled turnback shortly after losing contact. This maneuver was too smooth and too precise to be the product of random drift or catastrophic breakup. The Boeing 777 had navigated back over the Malaysian peninsula, slipping between known radar sectors, and then proceeded northwest along a route commonly used for commercial flights over the Andaman Sea. Flight paths are meant to be reported and monitored. This one was not. The shift in track complicated everything. The South China Sea, once the assumed crash site, was no longer credible. Thousands of square miles already searched would soon have to be abandoned, knowing that resources spent there could not be reclaimed. While ships and aircraft relocated westward, analysts at the British satellite communications firm Inmarsat examined a slender thread of information that would become legendary among aviation investigators. Satellites orbiting high above, Earth continued to exchange hourly handshake pings with MH370's communication equipment. Even after the transponder failed, these pings did not contain position data. They merely confirmed that the aircraft systems were powered and capable of sending a response. But when processed through mathematical modeling and Doppler shift calculations, they formed two vast arcs indicating where the aircraft might have been as each hourly ping occurred. The northern arc stretched into Central Asia, crossing the airspace of countries with dense radar and military surveillance, none of which reported unidentified traffic that night. The southern arc curved deep into the Indian Ocean, a region rarely monitored and rarely traveled. The choice between these arcs was stark. One pointed to land, military air defenses, and major population centers. The other pointed toward wilderness, thousands of kilometers of unbroken water, rolling seas, and some of the harshest search conditions on the planet. As evidence accumulated, the southern arc became the only viable interpretation. The search zone shifted again, this time to remote waters southwest of Australia. What began as a regional effort had become international in scope. More than 20 nations contributed personnel, aircraft or naval vessels during the early phases. For weeks, maritime patrol planes flew tight patterns across the ocean surface while ships trawled the waves, deploying sonar buoys and visual spotters. Each sortie returned empty-handed. The world watched as frustration and disbelief hardened into a broader interrogation of aviation's assumptions. Families demanded answers that authorities increasingly struggled to supply. Without wreckage, every conclusion felt theoretical, speculative, or painfully abstract. Aviation authorities rely on flight recorders, the black boxes, to provide definitive explanations for failures, malfunctions, or human decision-making. Without them, the possible causes remained a menu of guesses. Statesmen and officials found themselves attending press briefings that offered little more than revised maps and cautious language. Search zones expanded and contracted based on evolving models of fuel burn, autopilot behavior, wind patterns, and hypothetical last-course corrections. Every refinement promised the breakthrough that proved elusive. Meanwhile, countries debated cost-sharing, jurisdiction, and long-term responsibility. The Indian Ocean's abyssal plains presented unique operational challenges. Underwater search vehicles struggled in depths exceeding 15,000 feet. Seafloor ridges and trenches complicated sonar imaging. The mission slowly shifted from a sprint to a marathon. Months passed, then years. Joint Operational Command was eventually consolidated under Australia, which took on the primary burden of mapping the ocean floor and coordinating deepwater robotics. By late 2016, the underwater search had covered more than 120,000 square kilometers. No main wreckage, fuselage, wing sections, or flight recorders were found. Yet the investigation did not remain devoid of physical evidence forever. In 2015, debris washed up on the shores of Réunion Island almost 4,000 kilometers from the projected impact zone. The part, a flaperon from the right wing of MH370, carried serial features identifying it beyond doubt. Additional composite panels, cabin interior items, and fragments later surfaced on beaches in Mozambique, Madagascar, and South Africa. These items confirmed what satellite pings had implied. The aircraft had indeed met its end in the southern Indian Ocean. The debris ruled out high-altitude breakup or interception. It suggested an impact with significant force, but still could not clarify whether it was controlled, semi-controlled, or the terminal act of an aircraft flying itself to fuel exhaustion. By the end of the official search in January 2017, the global aviation community stood at an uncomfortable crossroads. The mystery endured without closure. Massive. Resources had been deployed, yet the cockpit voice, recorder and flight data recorder remained unrecovered, along with the central answers about what occurred in the minutes following the loss of communication. As years accumulated, the world learned a sober realization. The disappearance of MH370 was not just an accident. It was a systemic failure of visibility, accountability, and technology built on assumptions that no longer felt airtight. The search phase had evolved into a search for meaning. When a modern commercial airliner vanishes without a single distress call, the global aviation system confronts not just a technical failure, but an existential challenge. The loss of MH370 opened a void into which speculation, hypothesis, and forensic inference poured. Investigators, scientists, pilots, engineers, and intelligence agencies all attempted to construct a coherent narrative. Each theory sought to reconcile the observable facts. None could fully reconcile the silence, the deviation, and the isolation that defined MH370's last hours. One of the earliest theories emerged from the flight path itself. The deliberate turnback, the altitude changes inferred by primary radar, and the transition from civilian to military monitored airspace-indicated control inputs. Aircraft do not execute coordinated turns or altitude adjustments without guidance. This positioned human decision-making at the center of investigative scrutiny. The captain, a veteran pilot with decades of experience, and his first officer, relatively young but fully qualified, were both analyzed with microscopic detail. Their personal lives, flight histories, medical records, financial stability, and emotional state became objects of forensic examination. Authorities found nothing conclusive pointing to sabotage or suicide, though the possibility remained on the table simply because the alternative explanations struggled to fit all the data. Opposing that narrative was the hypothesis of catastrophic mechanical or electrical failure, one severe enough to disable communications and incapacitate the crew, yet leave the aircraft capable of flying long distances. The depressurization theory, a slow or explosive loss of cabin pressure, suggested a scenario in which oxygen deprivation rendered everyone unconscious while the autopilot continued flying the programmed route. The aircraft, eventually exhausting its fuel, would descend uncontrolled into the ocean. But inconsistencies undercut this scenario. Radar tracks indicated variations in altitude, and course direction inconsistent with a simple ghost flight. Depressurization also tends to trigger automatic alerts and system responses, none of which were recorded or detected by satellite. A third hypothesis explored the possibility of cascading electrical failure. Modern airliners are engineered with redundancy in mind, but no system is entirely immune to malfunction. A fire, short circuit, or sequential shutdown could disable transponders, radios, and monitoring systems while leaving autopilot and engines operational. Yet fire, particularly one near volatile components, typically creates a chain reaction culminating in structural failure. MH370 flew for more than 6 hours after disappearing from radar, behavior inconsistent with an uncontrolled electrical emergency. Investigators also considered cargo ignition. Lithium batteries, shipped increasingly in commercial holds, have been implicated in multiple aviation incidents. But again, they cause rapid escalation, not silent controlled deviation, into remote airspace outside. Mechanical and human-centered theories. Existed darker geopolitical conjectures. Some speculated that the aircraft strayed into sensitive airspace and was intercepted. Others imagined covert hijacking, mid-air abduction via military jet, or unauthorized cargo triggering classified intervention. These narratives persisted because of the absence of definitive evidence and because the region around the Andaman Sea intersects multiple national defense concerns, yet none of the countries with early detection capabilities, India, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, reported any military engagement. None faced internal leaks, radar logs, or whistleblower disclosures corroborating intercept activity. The geopolitical vacuum remained filled with conjecture, but no state-sponsored footprint materialized. Satellite calculations offered their own constraints. The 7-hourly Inmarsat pings not only sketched a corridor but also captured subtle changes in frequency that implied motion and speed patterns. Scientists working with these figures inferred that, near its end, MH370 likely turned south on a path consistent with autopilot management. The final ping occurred hours later, coinciding with the point at which fuel reserves would have been exhausted. The aircraft almost certainly entered a descent soon afterward. Whether this descent was gradual, rapid, or chaotic remained an open question. The absence of black boxes transformed inference into the dominant investigative method. Debris fragments carried clues on their surfaces, delamination patterns, water wear, marine colonization rates, and fracture signatures. These indicated that the aircraft hit the water with enough kinetic energy to break apart but not to disintegrate. This supported the theory that the aircraft remained largely intact until impact, contradicting hijack and crash fantasies or catastrophic mid-air breakup. The partial flaperon discovered on Réunion in 2015 exhibited beaching wear consistent with prolonged sea drift. Modeling those drift patterns backward required expert knowledge of currents, seasonal eddies, and wind fields across the southern Indian Ocean. Analysts used supercomputers to simulate where objects released at different times and locations might wash ashore, but ocean systems are inherently nonlinear and chaotic. Drift modeling narrowed possibilities, but could not pinpoint an exact crash, latitude and longitude. Beyond physical debris, one of the most profound consequences of MH370 was a transformation of aviation data policy. Until 2014, airlines were not required to stream flight data continuously. Black boxes, when recovered, supplied investigators with post-event answers. MH370 revealed a flaw. Answers are hostage to access. Satellite manufacturers and regulators began discussing standards for real-time data transmission. ICAO, the Global Aviation Authority, proposed that aircraft regularly broadcast position, updates, and automatically issue emergency signals when systems detect anomalies. Airlines and governments debated cost, bandwidth, and privacy implications, especially given the sheer volume of parameters recorded during long-haul operations. But public pressure and reputational risk accelerated acceptance. Technology that once seemed optional became essential. Another enduring narrative concerned the psychological weight on families. Relatives of the 239 people aboard MH370 lived through cycles of promise and disappointment. A debris photo shared on social media, a rumor of underwater acoustic pings, a false report of radar returns, a satellite image widely misinterpreted. Each development raised and crushed hope. The absence of answers became its own type of torment. Closure is not just emotional, it is procedural. Without confirmed loss or discovered remains, families struggle to settle estates, exit legal limbo, or move forward with certainty. In the vacuum of authority, crowdsourced intelligence emerged. Online aviation communities, satellite hobbyists, radio enthusiasts, and amateur cartographers collaborated in unprecedented ways. Some offered sober calculations and innovative hypotheses. Others veered into conspiracy. The democratization of data, while empowering, also complicated the landscape. Social media amplified voices that were both insightful and misleading. The search for truth became entangled with the search for narrative. By the end of the third year, MH370 had become more than a missing aircraft. It was a proxy for every fear about technological dependence, opaque government processes, and the fragility of certainty. Theories multiplied because proof remained elusive. Each hypothesis held fragments of possibility, yet none reconciled all known facts. The world understood the stakes. A modern aircraft equipped with multiple redundancies had vanished, and could do so again. That realization, more than any theory, pressured the global system to evolve. Long after search vessels returned to port and satellite, data analysts closed their case files. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 continues to echo through the world's aviation system. Some tragedies are defined by what investigators recover. MH370 is defined by what was lost: evidence, certainty, and narrative closure. The absence of answers did not stall progress. Instead, it shaped a decade of reforms, debates, and technological innovation, each designed to ensure that nothing so large could disappear so completely again. The first wave of legacy emerged from regulatory bodies. The International Civil Aviation Organization, charged with setting global standards, responded to MH370 with urgency. It instituted requirements for more frequent aircraft location reporting, particularly over oceans and remote regions where radar cannot penetrate. Airlines were directed to equip fleets with systems that automatically broadcast their position, speed, and altitude at intervals synchronized, with satellite networks rather than ground stations. This meant that even if a transponder failed or communication was disrupted, a passive trail of digital footprints would remain. These reforms, while technical in appearance, fundamentally changed the assumptions of global aviation oversight. Alongside mandatory tracking enhancements came discussions around flight data streaming. Historically, black boxes served as sealed repositories of truth. Designed to survive impact, ocean pressure, and fire, they remained the authoritative source of post-crash analysis. Yet MH370 demonstrated the vulnerability of relying solely on recoverable devices. Without access to the cockpit voice recorder and the digital flight data recorder, investigators could only infer the flight's final events. Airlines, satellite operators, and avionics manufacturers began testing systems capable of transmitting critical parameters in real time, at least during irregular events. What was once considered an unnecessary cost became a risk mitigation imperative. While not universally adopted, streaming concepts gained traction, and hybrid systems began emerging as feasible models, balancing data volume, bandwidth, and cybersecurity. The second wave of legacy involved search and rescue coordination. Before MH370, responsibility for search areas transferred between national authorities and patterns, dictated by geography rather than capability. The Southern Indian Ocean search forced nations to reconcile legal boundaries with operational realities. Australia assumed lead command despite the airliner belonging to Malaysia because it possessed assets suited for deep-water exploration. This alignment, based on comparative advantage rather than jurisdiction, set a precedent. The aviation and maritime sectors recognized that complex disappearances demand unified command structures, standardized communication protocols, and pre-agreed frameworks that reduce diplomatic friction when minutes matter. Beyond operational changes, MH370 reshaped the cultural psychology of aviation. Commercial flight relies on trust. Trust in engineering, trust in air traffic control, trust that technology forms an unbroken safety net. The loss of MH370 strained that belief. Passengers realized that oceans, the size of continents, still contain vast areas beyond consistent human observation. This was not a regression to fear, but a sobering reminder of reality. Flight remains the safest mode of transportation, but safety is a living system, one requiring constant adaptation. The MH370 case became a rallying cry for transparency and rigor. Airlines faced renewed scrutiny regarding maintenance, training, mental health protocols, and cockpit access policies. One of the more difficult legacies sits with the families. The loved ones of 239 people boarded a routine red-eye to Beijing and never returned. Their fight for answers did not conclude when the official search was suspended. Advocacy coalitions formed, pushing governments to revive searches, adopt reforms, and disclose data. These families became stewards of accountability, navigating bureaucratic structures while carrying private grief. Their persistence ensured that MH370 remained on the public agenda even when media cycles turned elsewhere. Monuments were erected in Kuala Lumpur, Beijing, and Perth, symbols of memory, unfinished stories, and shared tragedy. The private sector also entered the search narrative. Technology companies specializing in seabed mapping, autonomous underwater vehicles, and acoustic interrogation proposed missions at reduced public cost. In 2018, Ocean Infinity, a marine exploration firm, undertook an extensive underwater sweep using autonomous drones, capable of surveying large areas faster and deeper than previous expeditions. Their effort surpassed many earlier attempts in sophistication, yet even this operation failed to locate the wreck. The ocean maintained its silence, reminding the world that vast portions of the planet remain unmapped and unknown. The lessons extended into emerging industries. Manufacturers of next-generation aircraft and avionics evaluated how MH370's disappearance could be prevented through design. Concepts included tamper-resistant communication systems, multi-layer transponder redundancy, and automatic emergency broadcast modes, triggered by anomalies in navigational logic. These technical responses signaled a broader philosophy: assume failure modes that never occurred before, because MH370 revealed that the improbable can materialize under the right or wrong conditions. In the academic realm, MH370 spurred analysis into probability modeling, ocean drift science, and multidisciplinary problem-solving. Universities and research labs used the event as a case study in uncertainty. This was not opportunism but recognition that high-impact, low-frequency events demand improved decision frameworks. Oceanographers refined understanding of Indian Ocean gyres. Data scientists developed new methods for interpreting sparse satellite signals. Psychologists studied decision-making under ambiguity, illustrating how absence of evidence complicates public communication. Each of these fields contributed insights, expanding knowledge far beyond aviation. Meanwhile, the narrative of MH370 permeated popular consciousness. Documentaries, books, simulations, and investigative series attempted to reconstruct possibilities. Public interest did not wane because the mystery offered fertile ground for speculation. Yet serious investigators consistently anchored the discourse to verifiable evidence. They cautioned against allowing conspiracy theories to overshadow the scientific analysis and technical rigor that define modern aviation. The distinction mattered. Societies must confront uncertainty with discipline, not conjecture. As a decade passed, consensus began to coalesce around a constrained range of scenarios. Most models pointed toward fuel exhaustion, automatic continuation on pilot-programmed headings, and a final descent within the southern arc. Whether this descent was guided, semi-guided, or fully uncontrolled remained unresolved, but the event's contours narrowed. The mystery persists, but it is no longer entirely shapeless. What remains is the chilling possibility that MH370 may never be fully found. The aircraft rests somewhere in a vast underwater expanse where deep-sea pressure, shifting sediment, and tectonic complexity impede discovery. In aviation's collective memory, MH370 occupies the space where knowledge meets humility. It punctures the illusion of omniscience. Even with satellites, radar, machine learning, and global networks, the planet still contains blind spots large enough to swallow a Boeing 777 whole. Yet its disappearance was not in vain. Flight tracking is stronger, response protocols are clearer, technology is more resilient, and global cooperation, though imperfect, proved capable of mobilizing on unprecedented scales. The tragedy of MH370 will always carry sorrow, but it also carries transformation. Its legacy is etched not in what investigators recovered, but in the system that emerged afterward. In the end, the ocean that took MH370 preserved its most valuable lesson: that progress is driven not just by what we know, but by the moments when we realize what we do not. The aircraft may lie silent beneath the waves, but the world it left behind continues to evolve in response, refusing to let its disappearance remain merely a mystery. It has become a catalyst, one that ensures the next aircraft that encounters unthinkable fate will never disappear so completely.